Good day. Before we start, I just want to make something very clear. The information I'm about to share comes from a news article published by SBS News, and the link to that article is available publicly. I'm not responsible for the reporting itself. My role here is to go through what SBS has written, break it down for you, and add my own thoughts and questions along the way. Think of this as an extended commentary. The facts are from SBS, and the reflections are mine. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin with the case of Dezi Freeman, the man who is at the centre of the largest police manhunt in Australian history. According to SBS News, despite weeks of intensive searching and even the announcement of a $1 million reward, Dezi Freeman has continued to evade arrest. Experts are now saying that police may even start winding down the search. The story goes like this. Back on the 26th of August, officers Neil Thompson and Vadim Dewart were shot dead while serving a search warrant at Freeman's home in Porepunkah, about 300 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. After the shootings, Freeman fled into the bushland and hasn't been seen since. SBS reports that Thompson was 59 years old and only a week away from retirement, while Dewart was just 34 and on temporary assignment in the area. Now, here's something to think about. One officer about to retire, another not even usually stationed there. What exactly brought them to Freeman's property that day? Was it really about enforcing the law, or was it about making an example of him? SBS also explains that the hunt for Freeman has turned into the largest tactical operation in Australian history. It hasn't just been Victoria Police, the Australian Federal Police, and even the Army have been involved. Terry Goldsworthy, a criminology expert and former detective inspector, told SBS he couldn't recall any single offender ever having this many resources thrown at them. He compared it to his own experience on the Gold Coast, saying that for a murder case they might have had 20 officers dedicated to the job. But here, we're talking about hundreds. His words were, "It's unprecedented." But understandable. Freeman is armed, dangerous, and a live threat. But let's stop for a moment. When you hear about hundreds of officers being deployed, you have to wonder, is this really about justice? Or is it about Victoria Police flexing their muscle? Are they trying to catch a man, or are they trying to send a message to anyone else who challenges them? According to SBS News, Victoria Police have said they are using every available resource and necessary skill to locate Freeman. After the shootings, tactical units were deployed, the kind of officers who often have military training and bushcraft experience. Criminology lecturer Dr. Vincent Hurley told SBS that these specialist officers are skilled in mapping, using compasses and surviving in rough terrain. He described it as a kind of primal search, because crime doesn't just happen in big cities. It also happens in rural and remote communities, and police have to be ready for that. But here's something to consider. If these officers are trained by the military, carrying heavy supplies and working in coordinated formations, they're predictable. They move in grid patterns, spirals crisscrossing the terrain. Freeman, on the other hand, isn't bound by procedure. He doesn't need to carry gear for a team, and if he knows the bush better than they do, doesn't that give him the advantage? SBS also notes that these searches are exhausting. Tactical police have to carry large amounts of food, water, weapons and protective equipment, which weighs them down over long distances. And that's why interstate police have been rotated in, to stop the Victorian officers from burning out too quickly. Another detail from SBS. Almost 100 officers from the Specialist Public Order Response Team were brought in just for one extra sweep of Mount Buffalo National Park. And to cover all possibilities, specialist cadaver dogs from Queensland Police were also deployed. But let me ask you this. If Victoria Police are already calling in cadaver dogs, does that mean they think Freeman might already be dead? Or are they just trying to give the impression that no stone is being left unturned, even though the odds of finding him are shrinking? And if this many resources are going into one manhunt, what does that say about other crimes happening across Victoria right now? How many officers were pulled away from protecting regular people, just so the state can focus on chasing a man who openly rejects their authority? According to SBS News, while the search for Freeman is the biggest in terms of police resources, it's far from the longest manhunt Australia has ever seen. History shows other fugitives who managed to stay on the run for years, even decades, and each case gives us a clue about what might happen here. Take John Bobak, for example. He's suspected of murdering Peter Wade and Maureen Ambrose on the Gold Coast back in 1991. Over 30 years later, he has never been caught. Police say his criminal network likely helped him vanish, and that raises a question if Freeman has any kind of support network. Whether ideological or personal, could he end up like Bobak, living quietly out of reach for decades? Or is the sheer amount of attention on him going to make that impossible? Then there's Gino and Mark Stoccos, a father and son who were fugitives for 8 years. They weren't just hiding. They were actively committing crimes while on the run, including eventually murdering 68-year-old Rosario Simone. When they were finally caught in 2015, they were sentenced to 40 years. The lesson from the Stoccos is that some fugitives keep moving and keep offending until they're forced into a corner. Will Freeman disappear into silence, or will he keep making noise and confrontation part of his story? Now consider Brenden Abbott, the so-called postcard bandit. He escaped Fremantle Prison in 1989 and was free for 6 years. Then he escaped again in 1997, taunting police with postcards from different towns. His fame made him harder to hide in the long run, and he was eventually caught again. Abbott's story shows that notoriety can be both a shield and a weakness. And Freeman is now Australia's most wanted man. His name, face and story are everywhere. On one hand, sympathisers might be more willing to help him. On the other, it only takes one person chasing that $1 million reward to bring him down. The case of Darko Desic is very different. He escaped prison in 1992 while serving time for growing marijuana and drug supply. Unlike Abbott, Desic stayed quiet. He lived in Sydney's northern beaches, working cash in hand as a handyman. For nearly 30 years, nobody caught him. In the end, he turned himself in, tired of living without Medicare, without Social Security, and constantly looking over his shoulder. That raises a real question. Could Freeman ever live that kind of quiet life? With the attention on him now, is it even possible? Or has he already crossed too many lines to just melt into the background like Desic did? And then we come to Malcolm Naden, who SBS says is the closest comparison to Freeman. Naden was wanted for the murders of Letitia Nolan and Christy Scholes, and for the aggravated indecent assault of a 15-year-old girl. He lived on the run for nearly 7 years, mostly in bushland, sometimes helped by people he knew. At one point, when police found one of his camps, he shot an officer in the shoulder. It still took 3 more months before they finally captured him in 2012. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years. That comparison matters, because Naden was someone who survived in the wild, used the bush as his shield, and directly attacked police during the search. The difference, though, is that when Naden killed, police didn't know who they were looking for at first. Freeman's name and face were known from day one. Every camera, drone and roadblock has been pointed at him since the beginning. Does that make his escape harder, or does it just feed into the image of him outsmarting the system? And here's where SBS adds another layer. They report that Freeman has been described as a so-called sovereign citizen, someone who rejects the authority of the state and refuses to recognize police power. But let's be cautious. That's the media's framing. We don't actually know if Freeman really sees himself that way, or if that's just an easy label being used to justify the size of this manhunt. Because when you call someone a sovereign citizen, you're not just describing them, you're setting a tone. You're telling the public this person is extreme, dangerous, maybe even ideological. And once the public accepts that, it's easier to explain why hundreds of officers and even the army are being used against a single man. So the question we have to ask is this: is Freeman really a sovereign citizen? Or is that just a convenient story for the media and the police to rally support for this unprecedented search? When you look at all these manhunts together, the big question is, what kind of fugitive Freeman will become? Will he be a ghost like Bobak, a restless outlaw like the Stoccos, a legend like Abbott, a quiet survivor like Desic, or a violent bushman like Naden? The answer may depend not only on Freeman himself, but on how much of his story is fact and how much is media construction. According to SBS News, at the height of the operation to find Freeman, there were around 400 officers searching. That number has now been cut down to about 200. Criminology expert Terry Goldsworthy explained that unless Freeman is found, the numbers will keep going down. His words were clear: there's only a finite area you can really saturate with police. If you've searched it, cleared it, and still found nothing, then the prospect is he may have got out. And if that's the case, resources will be reduced. That makes sense from a tactical point of view, but it also raises a bigger issue. Was the point ever just to catch Freeman? Or was it also to stage a massive show of force, proving that no one can defy Victoria Police without the system throwing its full weight at them? And if so, now that the show has been made, is the pressure to keep up this scale of operation already starting to fade? Dr. Vincent Hurley told SBS that while police will never officially call off the search, it will eventually be downgraded. The real question is how much it will shrink and how long police will keep dedicating hundreds of officers to it. And then comes the media narrative. SBS reports that Freeman has been described as a so-called sovereign citizen, someone with deep issues with authority who supposedly sees police as illegitimate. But again, that's their framing. That label makes Freeman sound like an ideologue trying to prove a point, but is that proven? Or is it just another way to justify why this manhunt is unlike anything else in Australian history? Because once you call someone anti-authority, once you say they see police as terrorist thugs, as some court documents reportedly show, it paints a picture that might or might not reflect the full truth. And it shapes how the public reacts. People are told to fear him, to assume he'll fight to the death, rather than even considering whether this situation could end differently. So here's the real dilemma. If Freeman is out there, what does winding down the search really mean? Does it mean police quietly accepting they lost track of him? Does it mean shifting from bushland sweeps to waiting for tips or mistakes? Or does it mean letting the media label linger while moving resources back to other priorities, leaving the case unresolved? And most importantly, what about the families of the officers who died? SBS quotes Hurley, saying he hopes Freeman will eventually be brought to court, so the families can finally ask him why and find closure. But if the search really does keep shrinking, will those families ever get the chance to face him? Or will this become another cold case, like Bobak, where decades later we're still asking what happened? So where does all of this leave us? According to SBS News, Dezi Freeman is still out there, somewhere. The largest manhunt in Australian history has not caught him, even after weeks of searching. Hundreds of officers, helicopters, drones, dogs, and even army support. The question is not just whether he will be found, but what this entire operation really means. Because history has shown us different endings. Some fugitives disappear forever, like John Bobak. Others make mistakes and get cornered, like the Stoccos. Some play up their notoriety, like Brenden Abbott, until the spotlight becomes their downfall. Some survive quietly for decades, like Darko Desic, until life on the run breaks them down. And some fight violently, like Malcolm Naden, until they're dragged back into the system. So which one will Freeman be? The media have painted him as a so-called sovereign citizen, someone at war with authority. But let's not forget, that's their framing, not proven fact. Sometimes labels are used to simplify a story, to make it easier to justify extraordinary measures. Was this really just about catching a fugitive, or was it also about demonstrating the power of the state? And let's ask the bigger question. If this level of force is used against one man, what does it say about priorities? While hundreds of officers combed through the bush, what crimes were left unchecked elsewhere? And if Freeman has already slipped far beyond the search area, then wasn't this massive operation as much about image as it was about results? For the families of the officers who died, none of that matters as much as one thing: closure. They deserve answers, and they deserve the truth about why that day unfolded the way it did. But whether they'll ever get those answers depends on whether Freeman is eventually caught, or whether his story fades into the shadows like other fugitives before him. And that's the uncomfortable truth. This manhunt may not end with dramatic headlines. It may end quietly with fewer officers in the field, with the trail going cold, with questions left unanswered. So here's how I'll leave it. Will Dezi Freeman become a ghost story like Bobak? Will he stay on the run for years like Naden? Or will he, like Desic, one day come forward on his own terms? Nobody knows. But whatever happens, this case will be remembered, not just because of what Freeman did, but because of what it revealed about Victoria Police, the media, and the lengths the system will go to when it feels challenged.